Hey, how's it going? Hope you're all doing great today. So, something kind of interesting just happened in the world of Nintendo, and I think a lot of fans, especially those who've spent time with Captain Toad and his adorable little adventures, are going to want to know what's up. We just got a brand new update for Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. And while on the surface it might look small, there's actually a lot to unpack once you start thinking about what it means, especially for people playing on the Switch 2 or those who've been keeping this game as part of their ongoing collection. The update is version 1.4.1. And yeah, that might sound like just a tiny point patch, but sometimes those small ones are the most interesting because they tend to carry a story behind them, something you can feel even if you can't exactly see it right away. Now, for anyone who hasn't played Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, let's set the stage a bit. This game is one of those that kind of sneaks up on you. It's not flashy like Mario or as fast-paced as something like Mario Kart, but it has its own calm, thoughtful kind of magic. You control Captain Toad, who's basically this lovable explorer, and you go through these little diorama-like levels solving puzzles, collecting gems, and figuring out clever ways to reach the goal without being able to jump. That limitation alone gives the game a very different kind of energy, more about perspective, observation, and timing than pure action. It's one of those games that feels relaxing, but also quietly satisfying. And since its original launch on the Wii U and later on the Switch, it's kind of become this low-key fan favorite that people like to return to every now and then. So, when Nintendo rolls out an update in 2025, years after its first release, it's a little surprising. It's like seeing a friend from years ago suddenly show up again with a slightly different look, and you start wondering what's changed. The official patch notes are short and sweet, basically saying several issues have been addressed to improve the gameplay experience. Classic Nintendo language, right? They love to keep it mysterious, but that's what makes this worth talking about, because when Nintendo says something like that, it usually means there's more going on under the hood than just a couple of bug fixes. The previous big update earlier this year, version 1.4.0, was a major one because it was tied to the new Switch 2 hardware launch. That update brought optimized visuals, HDR support, and game share features, which let players share gameplay or progress in a smoother way. It was clear that Nintendo wanted to make sure the game felt fresh and ready for the newer system. So now that we've got this 1.4.1 patch, it seems like it's more about tightening up the bolts after all those bigger changes. Think of it as cleaning up after a big house renovation. You've already done the heavy work, but now it's about polishing the corners and making sure everything feels solid and runs smoothly. What's interesting is that, according to people who've been poking around in the files, this update might also include back-end security or stability tweaks. Nintendo often does this without talking about it publicly, especially when it's related to network functionality or protecting save data integrity. That's not the kind of stuff they'll put in a press release, but players can usually tell when things start running just a bit more smoothly or when previously glitchy areas behave more consistently. There have even been a few mentions on forums from people saying that the loading screens feel a bit quicker or that certain lighting issues on the Switch 2 seem improved after the update. Nothing major, but those little refinements can make a surprising difference when you're replaying a game you already love. And that's another thing. This game, as simple as it is, has some really detailed design work going on behind the scenes. The way each level feels like a miniature world that you can rotate and explore from different angles is such a clever idea, and it's something that benefits a lot from stability improvements and visual updates. When you're controlling Captain Toad, every movement, every turn of the camera, and every puzzle solution feels deliberate. So when there are frame drops or tiny visual hiccups, it can actually break that gentle rhythm the game builds. So even though this update doesn't add new levels or characters, just making sure it feels as smooth as possible on new hardware makes a lot of sense. Now, I think it's worth mentioning how this game has sort of evolved since its original release. When Captain Toad Treasure Tracker first came out, it was this charming little side project, almost like a spin-off from the Super Mario 3D World universe. Nobody expected it to have this kind of longevity. But here we are, nearly a decade later, and it's still getting updates. That's a testament to how much people enjoy the atmosphere and the creativity in the level design. There's something really timeless about it. Even though it's not as big as something like Zelda or Mario Odyssey, it fits perfectly in Nintendo's lineup because it's different. It's slower, more thoughtful, and yet still full of that signature Nintendo charm. The timing of this update also feels pretty intentional. We're now in this era where Nintendo is blending their classic Switch games with the new Switch 2 platform, and they seem to be making sure that older titles still hold up. It's like they're giving these games a second life, making sure they're polished enough to stay relevant. If you think about it, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker could easily be one of those games they include in a subscription lineup or digital showcase for new players who might have missed it the first time around. And by quietly pushing out these stability updates, they're future-proofing it for that kind of rollout. Now, let's talk about the player experience side of things. If you haven't played the game in a while, now's actually a great time to revisit it. The levels feel just as charming as ever, Mike, and if you're playing on the Switch 2, the HDR update from earlier this year really adds something special. The colors pop in a way that feels surprisingly modern for a game of its age. The lighting looks warmer, reflections stand out more, and the environments feel more immersive. It's almost like you're seeing an upgraded version of your childhood toy set, but one that's alive and full of surprises. The cool thing about this update is that it's not forcing you to change anything about how you play. It's one of those updates that just quietly enhances the experience. You don't need to relearn controls or deal with new mechanics. You just start the game and everything feels slightly more refined, a little more responsive, a bit more polished. And that's honestly the kind of update I appreciate most from Nintendo. They don't have to make a big announcement about it. They just let the improvements speak for themselves. Of course, that doesn't stop the speculation. Whenever Nintendo drops an update like this, the community starts wondering, what are they preparing for? Could there be some kind of re-release or new content tie-in down the line? Maybe something like a digital deluxe version, or perhaps a new Toad-themed adventure? It's possible, and given that Captain Toad Treasure Tracker has appeared across multiple platforms already, it wouldn't be shocking if they had plans to extend its life even further. Nintendo tends to play the long game, and they're really good at keeping older titles relevant when the time is right. If we're being honest, updates like this also show how much Nintendo still cares about their older games. They could have easily left Captain Toad untouched, moved on to the next big release, and most people wouldn't have complained. But instead, they've made sure it stays compatible and enjoyable even years later. It's kind of refreshing, especially in a time when some companies abandon their games just a year or two after release. Nintendo's approach may be quiet, but it's definitely appreciated by fans who like coming back to these comfort titles. Now, if you're wondering whether it's worth downloading the update, the answer is absolutely yes. There's really no downside. It doesn't change your save data. It doesn't alter your gameplay progress. It just makes everything a bit smoother. Plus, Nintendo's updates are tiny in file size compared to most modern games, so it won't eat up your storage space or take forever to install. It's the kind of update that feels invisible, but once you play for a bit, you can tell something's subtly better. Whether it's performance, faster transitions, or just cleaner visuals, it's all part of that improved experience they talk about. If you think about it, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker has always been about perspective, both literally and figuratively. The way you rotate the levels to find hidden paths kind of mirrors how we, as players, rediscover games when they get updates like this. Sometimes a little patch can make you look at a familiar game in a new way. You notice things you missed before, appreciate small details you hadn't paid attention to, and remember why you loved it in the first place. And honestly, I think that's what this update achieves. It's not groundbreaking, but it gives the game a gentle refresh that makes it worth revisiting, especially if you've got the new hardware. So what's next? Well, only Nintendo knows for sure, but this pattern of quietly refreshing older titles is starting to feel like a strategy. They're keeping their library relevant and ready, and it's probably leading up to some sort of expanded ecosystem where Switch, and Switch 2 players share access to a bigger digital catalog. Captain Toad fits right into that vision, accessible, polished, and perfectly suited for short play sessions that still feel meaningful. If you've been waiting for an excuse to jump back into this game, now's your moment. Update your copy, fire it up, and just explore a few levels. You'll probably notice the smoothness right away. The camera feels snappier, transitions are faster, and overall, it just feels better tuned for today's hardware.